Hey guys, I got some great mysteries for you today, and a few surprising answers. I'm not focusing on a hard theme today. These are just some big unanswered things in the game that I don't see other people talking about. I did end up chaining them together though, so sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Here are 7 major mysteries in Tears of the Kingdom. Number 1. Why is the Light Dragon missing the Master Sword? Once Link awakens in the sky after being saved by Raro's arm, we are introduced to the tutorial area of the game, the Great Sky Island. During that first epic dive of the game, we can see the Light Dragon for the first time in the distance. And if you look carefully, you will notice that there is no light streaming from its head. This continues to be the case as we go through the tutorial, with the Light Dragon circling around the island usually within view if you look for it. Each time you view it though, it will be lacking the same beautiful trail of light that comes from the Master Sword. This visual will continue all the way until you complete the tutorial, which is when the decayed Master Sword is sent back in time, using the time powers transferred from Zelda. At that point, the Light Dragon will come up through the clouds roaring and causing them to disperse. Even in this cutscene though, there is no trailing light from its head. Immediately following this though, when you observe the dragon, that trail of light will be there. I went to the effort of flying out to her during the tutorial to see if the sword was in her head, and here is some clear footage showing that it is not. Immediately following the transfer of the sword, I flew out to her again, landing on her and collecting some light spikes, then made my way to her head. Sure enough, there was a trail of light coming from the Master Sword, all there for me to try and collect. Clearly, there is a disconnect here. We all know that the sword should be in the dragon during the tutorial. This game works off circular time travel logic. The dragon is Zelda because she got the Master Sword in the past, chose to become the dragon in order to repair it, and guards it for Link over countless years. So why is it not visible during the tutorial? I think the most obvious solution is that the developers were trying to hide the Master Sword, so that way it would not spoil the surprise. But I think that is the most boring answer. Consider this. When the Light Dragon comes up through the clouds, it is giving off a huge roar, the same type of roar we hear when we grasp the sword in its head. I believe this is a roar of pain. If it is, then could it be that when Link sent the sword back in time, that act altered the timeline, and that the dragon is suddenly responding to the emerging sword appearing in its head? It's certainly an interesting concept, isn't it? I know that there are issues with this, especially since I just said the game works off circular time logic. I ask that you hold off on your comments until you hear the rest of these mysteries. I promise, they are related. Number 2. Were the murals always the same? At the very start of the game in the Forgotten Foundation, you see a set of murals depicting the imprisoning war shortly after the founding of Hyrule. Of the revealed murals, it details all the obvious stuff: the Zonai descending, Rauru and Sonia's marriage, her death and theft of her secret stone, and the overwhelming army of the Demon King. The next few murals are covered by rocks at that point in the game. The next one would depict the battle with the Demon King himself, which we are able to see at the very top if you ignore Zelda and climb around on the wall looking like an idiot. Now, of course, we know that at the end of the game, when you return to this very room, you can break apart this rubble and see the final sets of murals. The sages fighting the Demon King, complete with Zelda, her on an altar receiving the Master Sword, and her ascension to the sky as a dragon with the Master Sword clearly in her head. The implication of time travel in this game is that these murals were always there, always the same, because these events always took place. And yet, in the last mystery, I strongly question if that is the case. Might I remind you of what Rauru told Zelda in one of the memories?
But remember, that was a future where you never appeared in this world. And you are here now. Zelda, I believe there is a reason you were sent to us. It has to mean something.
Rauru, who is not infallible, believes in timeline split logic. That view is that when an alteration to the timeline happens, a splinter happens leading to different paths. Basically what the entire old Zelda timeline is based on. In this case though, Zelda traveled back in time. Zelda's time travel took her to the past, where she became a dragon and persisted to the present. It is all treated as a stable time loop, and as such, something that would not cause a splinter. It could be, however, that the Master Sword going back in time really did cause a change in things. We would expect this to cause a timeline split, of course, but the story may be presented under a timeline reconstruction logic instead, which means that changes of the past ripple forward and alter the present. We see this in the first Back to the Future movie, as well as the old X-Men cartoon from the 90s. Really, it appears in a lot of media, but I digress. While we know that Zelda received the sword and chose to become a dragon in order to heal it, consider a different situation. What would have happened had the sword not miraculously appeared in front of her? Given the events laid out, would she continue to wallow in despair and then change into a dragon thinking that it is the only way to see Link again? If that were the case, then perhaps the murals would have portrayed a different scene at the end. Scenes of such a Zelda in despair. I know what you might be thinking. That people have smuggled hammers into the start of the game, and that others have used various memory editors to be able to see the murals in the intro. At this point, data miners have probably extracted the images. In doing so, they revealed the same textures from the end of the game. And yes, that is indisputable. However, I ask you to consider that we were never meant to see those textures at this point in the game. And so, just because people have, shall we say, creatively uncovered them, it was never intended by the developers for us to see. As such, we cannot take what these people have found for canon. Some may not agree with that sentiment. I anticipate a few spicy comments on the topic. If this idea is true though, it would explain why the Light Dragon circles the Great Sky Island during the tutorial. When Zelda was disappearing, she would have seen Link grabbed by Raru's arm, and so she would have known, or at least hoped, that Raru's hand would have taken him someplace safe. The dragon may have then come to this location because of her belief that one day her chosen knight would awaken there, where she could at least see him one more time. And sure enough, from the moment that Link awakens in the Room of Awakening, she is there, watching over him. Number 3. How did Rauru know to go to the sky? Speaking of Raru's arm, let's ask about how it knew to take Link to the sky. See, from Raru's point of view, at least with the information we have from the cutscenes, he is unaware of the intent to raise the Garden of Time into the sky. In fact, it is only on the eve of the battle with the Demon King that Zelda comes clean to him about her knowledge of the future. That the Demon King, who I would remind you, is named such by King Rome in Breath of the Wild, would revive under the castle with Raru's arm grabbing Link. At that moment in time, Rauru was unaware that they were going to raise the garden into the sky, yet alone that Link would awaken there. It brings to mind a unintentionally comical scenario, where Rauru is dragging an unconscious Link up through Hyrule Castle, the poor guy dangling by his ruined arm, while Rauru flies to the Great Plateau, realizing that the Temple of Time isn't there anymore. Eventually he would realize that the Garden of Time is now in the sky, and fly upwards, taking Link to the Great Sky Island. Once in the Room of Awakening, it is only then that Rauru would begin the process of replacing his arm. I suppose it is also possible that Rauru just teleported there with some of his poorly defined powers. But then we have to question what exactly a dismembered hand could do. Clearly a lot. He is able to bind himself to Link's body, maybe after amputating the corrupted limb. It's probably best not to think about what he would have used to do that. Only one instrument comes to mind. Speaking of dismemberment. Number 4. What happened to Raru's body? When Link and Zelda find the Demon King, he is in this strange position, bent back, somehow balanced with Raru's hand on him. I brought this up in my Sheikah Tech video, but if we compare this to the scene where Raru seals him, in the past he was more upright. To me, this looks like in the time between then and the present, that Raru's body disappeared, causing Ganondorf to fall back more into this position, all while that mystic spiral is absorbed by that stone above them. Many people assume that Raru's body withered away over the years, and I'll grant you that makes sense given it's been 10,000 or more years. The problem with that is, why hasn't Ganondorf and Raru's hand also decayed to nothing? It sure seems to me that there should be two mummies here, right? In my first playthrough, this was on my mind a lot. Before I knew the truth about the Light Dragon, I was thinking that Raru's body may have changed into it, maybe eating his secret stone in the process, all while leaving his arm there to seal Ganondorf. That was wrong, of course, but even back then this mystery was on my mind. I have since come to the conclusion that the Sheikah body snatched him for their own technology, and maybe the creation of a new hero. Go check out my Sheikah technology video if you're curious about that. That theory aside, you have to admit that his body missing is a very interesting situation, and a question that remains unanswered. That is why I've marked it as a mystery. Moving along. Hey guys, let me interrupt for just a moment. If you're enjoying the video, please give it a like. Subscribing to the channel is a big help to me right now. I'm sure you guys know all about the YouTube stuff. Just know that the more subscribers a channel gets, the better it does, and the more I can do this type of thing full time. Now, back to the mysteries. Number 5. What is the imprisoning chamber? The imprisoning chamber is where the final battle with the Demon King took place. It is an interesting location. A central platform suspended into the air, with a single walking path leading to it from the Forgotten Foundation. If we look at the rubble at the end of the game, we can see one of these spikes sticking out of it, the same type of spike that appears in a lot of Zonai Sky Islands, perhaps implying that this platform was levitating. Looking down below, we can see more Zonai stonework, and so perhaps this platform was actually an elevator. Regardless of its exact purpose, there are these large spikes all around it pointing to the center, with a very unusual one overhead. Those of you who have watched my videos are aware this is the base of the High Roll Pillar, as I call it, the shaft of stone that pushed the castle into the sky at the start of the game, right under the throne room, right where the Sheikah would later build their astral observatory. Under this location is what the game calls Gloom's Lair, a huge cavern with vast space sinking into nothing but void, lower than any other spot in the depths we can find. Here, there is a large gloom tree growing, the source of the gloom roots across the depths, and presumably how Ganondorf is spreading that gloom in the first place. It is entirely possible that this gloom tree is new, or if not new, wasn't nearly as large as it is when we arrive at the end of the game. However big and important this tree is, the Demon King hadn't made it to this location just yet in the past. He was stopped in the imprisoning chamber. We don't know the exact reason why Raru decided to attack Ganondorf at this moment, at this location. Based on the atmosphere in the memories, the gravity of the situation, the kingdom was quite possibly on the verge of losing. It is possible that they were forced to confront Ganondorf here, or risk losing the war. If they didn't, they would risk him gaining something of so much power that he, who was already the largest threat they have ever faced, might become even more powerful. To me, the imprisoning chamber looks like an elevator leading down to Gloom's lair. When Ganondorf awoke, once Link was neutralized, he shot a torrent of gloom into the central pillar, causing it to shove upwards. I don't think that his goal was necessarily to shove the castle upward, but rather to force the elevator to break apart so he would fall to the bottom. Shoving the castle up triggered the upheaval, allowing his gloom to spread across the land, which is a benefit for sure. But I think his immediate goal was to pick up exactly where he left off, to continue to make his way to Gloom's lair. It's too bad he didn't monologue more. I would have loved to hear what his goals were and precisely how he was planning to do it. Number 6. What are the Bargainer statues? These last two mysteries deal with the Bargainer and Hylia statues. The Bargainer statues are one of the more interesting concepts in the game, as the entity behind them are not only seemingly neutral to the affairs of good and evil, or at least so they claim, but rather desire to send lost souls to a proper afterlife. They also share a curious relationship with the Hylia statues around the kingdom, where they seem to balance each other in some type of hierarchy. While we do see a couple smaller statues in the game, ones that might be a balance to the Hylia statues we see in the settlements, we fail to see those in the depths in those locations. I feel that that is an oversight, that each one of these mines under a settlement should have a small Bargainer statue at them. But that is beside the point. The exact motives of the person behind these statues is unknown, but they are clearly on the more sinister side of things. Maybe they even had a cult dedicated to them, which is what this clothing set may be about. The thing that I really want to talk about, though, is something that has come to light involving these statues. For due to data mining, a name for these statues has come out: Armos. For those of you unaware, Armos is a classic Zelda enemy. Statues that would come to life, move around slowly trying to attack Link, and usually hitting pretty hard. There have been different incarnations of them over the games, but generally they are seen as moving statues. This of course asks the question, are the Bargainer statues Armos statues? While that is an interesting concept, I ultimately have to lean towards no. Here is why. File names are not something that is supposed to be public knowledge. It's meant to be obfuscated, hidden, and there is a very real possibility it reflects early ideas from the developers that they may have changed their mind on. You see, in Japanese, the Bargainer statues are actually called demon statues. We don't really know why Nintendo felt the need to change that name. It would seem that in the final parts of the game, they chose to make these statues a demon balance to Hylia, which is fine by me. Much like we can't take what is supposed to be unseen murals at the start of the game as canon, so too can we not take these file names as canon. I will say though that these voices, the entities behind these statues, seem to only use the statues as a means of communicating with the living. They seem to be able to talk through other statues nearby, including those of the Hylia ones. If the Armos statues we see throughout the series are simply receptacles for an entity to control and move, perhaps not too dissimilar from the statues we see Link control in Twilight Princess, then perhaps they really are Armos statues after all. Just an empty shell that they can do whatever they need to in. It's interesting to consider, that much is true. Number 7. Why is Goddess Hylia alive? Speaking of statues, our final mystery involves the goddess ones. Here is one for all of you guys who believe Skyward Sword is canon to Tears of the Kingdom. In Skyward Sword, we learn of Goddess Hylia's plan to use the Triforce in order to defeat the Demon Lord Demise. Part of that plan involves her giving up her immortality, so she can reincarnate as a Hylian, a mortal, as only mortals are able to use the power of the Triforce, for some reason. Basically, the entire game was set up to give her access to it, and while that didn't really work out, her backup plan of making Link worthy to use the relic kicked in and saved the day. Still, there is that little situation of her, dying. The implication from that point is that Hylia's powers are being passed down in the bloodline of the royal family, which is ultimately why the princess is so important. Impa, from Breath of the Wild, says that the princess carries the bloodline of a goddess, and the tapestry alludes to the princess using the Triforce as her sacred power. All very interesting indeed, but I assure you that is where the similarities end. In Breath of the Wild, when you speak to the Hylia statues at the Springs of Power and Courage for the first time, the voice clearly states that they are Goddess Hylia. I asked my friend Laurelian historian to double check this in Japanese, and he confirmed that this text is indeed the same. This is pretty plain and simple too. a clear indication that this is Hylia, not a proxy, not a spirit, but the voice of the goddess herself. It also implies that the voice at the statues that talk to you are all from the same person, be it from the statues at the springs, to the statues and settlements, to the large one at the Forgotten Temple. This is the entity that lets you trade in your spirit orbs for heart containers or stamina vessels. The entity that gives the hero his Clothing of the Wild set, as a reward for completing all 120 base shrines. Clothing, I might add, which is stated in its description to have been made specifically to fit Link. And let's not forget that each and every Sheikah monk tells Link that their trial is in the name of Goddess Hylia. So tell me, with Breath of the Wild so clearly calling this entity Hylia, how is it possible that the Hylia from Skyward Sword continues to be the Goddess Hylia so far into the future? After all, she gave up her immortality so she could reincarnate as a mortal, and that mortal eventually died. Perhaps she reincarnated again and again, but she would remain so as a mortal. Let's use this little thing called Occam's razor. The clear and most obvious answer is that Breath of the Wild is, and always was, intended to be a reboot. The references to past games are superficial at best. And keep in mind, this is all before we touch on what Tears of the Kingdom introduces and doubles down on. In Tears of the Kingdom, the goddess statue in the Forgotten Temple is revealed to have been moved there sometime later, as it is not in the past during the imprisoning war at that location, and inspection of it shows that it cannot be the same one from Skyloft, based on its size compared to Link. It also lacks the indentation that we see in Skyward Sword, the one that Zelda would have inserted the Loftwing trophy into from the ceremony. On a similar note, there are no signs of Skyloft in the skies of Hyrule, nor the huge goddess statue that accompanied it, be it if it was still in the sky or at the ceiling grounds. And I know that you might be thinking that the toppled statue quest presents the goddess statues as different entities, and not a single entity such as Goddess Hylia behind them. However, if you go back and read the text carefully, there is no contradiction to this entity being Hylia. It doesn't matter which spring statue you start this quest from, you get the same dialogue from the same person. This is the voice of Hylia. Need more proof that she is alive? Look at the conversation with the horned statue and its story told by others. It says that it is being punished by Hylia. Jaren says that there is a dark inverse force of Hylia, and it is clear that Hylia is alive and active in the world. The mystery here isn't so much why Hylia is alive, but what her being alive means to the timeline. Frankly, it means that the events told in Skyward Sword didn't happen. As a theorist, I bent over backwards before Tears of the Kingdom came out, trying to justify that Skyward Sword was canon to Breath of the Wild. And trust me, I am disappointed that it isn't, but this is as strong of evidence as any I can supply, to show that it simply isn't canon. You can make up whatever stuff to try and justify it, but in the end, there is too much contradictory evidence between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to conclude that Skyward Sword is in the same continuity as them. Yes, there is a spirit of the Master Sword, and while that spirit remains officially unnamed in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, its name very well could be Fi. Even then, that wouldn't mean it's the same Fi that we know, merely this continuity's version of her. I like to think that she would be a Japanese shrine maiden instead of a porcelain doll, but I digress. I think the bitter truth that Nintendo refuses to publicly admit to is that this is all a reboot, plain and simple. It is likely motivated out of fear of fan backlash, given the reaction to other reboots that came out when they started making Breath of the Wild, such games as DMC and Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Let's not forget about how the backlash to Wind Waker caused huge problems for Nintendo. Even if it is a reboot, that doesn't mean that the fun stops here though. There is plenty of speculation to be had with this new continuity. Just stop pretending that the things that we've assumed for so long are still true. In a way, it's refreshing, because it's an open path ahead of us, and I for one look forward to seeing where the series goes from here. And that was 7 major mysteries from Tears of the Kingdom. I'm looking forward to the feedback in the comments below. But please, keep it civil. Remember, I'm a person too, and I've put a lot of thought into these mysteries. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. For those of you who are in a position to do more, signing up with my Patreon or becoming a channel member is the best way you can help. You will gain access to my Discord and be able to talk to me more directly there, be able to influence my future content, and I will give you a shout out in my next video after joining. Plus, your name will show up with all these fine people down here in every episode. That's all I got for you today, guys. Be safe, and may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.